Hola, mi gente. Welcome to another episode of the Wine and Chisme Podcast, a podcast created to share the stories of everyday people doing remarkable things in communities of color, all while sipping on a glass of wine. In this episode, I get the chance to speak with my friend Jessie Medina. Jessie is the founder and CEO of several businesses, including, wait for it, FEM Latinas, FEMgency, FEMX Podcast, and of course, FEMX Quarters, a co-working and event space located in the hills of San Diego. Her mission is to create a positive impact by being a motivational and loving leader and to inspire women to overcome their fear and follow their dreams. Although I consider myself a good friend of Jessie's, I was still surprised to hear so many things that she revealed throughout her interview. Just so you know, this interview was recorded before we were made aware of COVID-19 and the requirement of social distancing. So it's kind of weird that this interview feels a world away now, but I'm so glad you're here and ready to listen. So grab your glass of wine and join us for the Chisme. Hi, Jessie.
Hi, Jess. How are you?
We have Jessica and Jessica. Well,
yes.
but we say she's Jessie, I'm Jessica, or Jay. I'm super happy to have you here today.
I'm really excited to be here. Thank you.
I know. This is like a totally different interaction for us.
Yes.
So I help Jessie with some of her public relations and media training. So we have not discussed any of the questions.
Nope.
She has no idea what I'm going to talk to her about. She trusts me that much.
Oh my. I'm like nervous laughing already.
Don't be nervous. Okay, so you guys all know by now, before we get to the chisme, we have to get to the wine.
Yes.
So, if you are not aware, Jessie is originally from Argentina.
Woo-woo.
So, of course, in honor of her being from Argentina, I picked up a Malbec.
Which is from my hometown, by
Mendoza.
the way. Thank you so much.
Yes. So, we have an Alamos Malbec from Mendoza 2018. So, salud. Let's take a drink.
I've actually been to that winery, too.
Oh, have you?
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
So good.
Yes, it's really, really good. There honestly has not been a wine that I haven't liked yet. If you guys hear anything in the background, we have both of our dogs here. And
Our babies.
yes. So just an FYI. So again, I've been getting most of the wines at Trader Joe's because they actually have a very good selection of wine.
Mm-hmm.
And I got this Alamos wine for $7.99.
Wow.
Yes.
That's a good thing about Mendoza wine. It's cheap, but it's not cheap tasting.
No.
I love that.
Exactly. So, all right, Jessie, you ready? We got to the wine. You ready to get to the
you calm me
chisme?
down now. Yeah.
Okay. The wine helps with that.
Yeah.
The wine helps with that. So, Jessie, so originally, we said you're originally from Argentina.
Mm-hmm.
How was it when you grew, like, how was your life? Describe your life growing up in Argentina.
As a kid, I cannot complain. I had a really good childhood. I loved spending time with my grandparents. I had a lot of friends. But we were poor. Like, we did grow up with a lot of challenges. I still always felt like a happy kid. I never was that kid that was, like, sad. I was always happy. I always had a lot of friends. But I do remember the challenges that you go through. My mom was, separated from my dad. And my dad is amazing, but he wasn't necessarily very responsible. So the burden was on her to provide for us. So she worked a lot. We spent a lot of time with our grandparents. And I love that too, because I learned how to cook from my grandma. I had a lot of good experiences. But I do remember having moments when I was like, I want to be with my mom. Like, why does she work so much? Or, like, I miss her. Just moments like that. And I do remember that struggle of, like, the single mom kind of thing.
Yeah. So your family decided to move
Mm-hmm.
to the United States.
Yes.
To Utah, of all places.
I know. I was like, where's that?
When you were 14.
Yes.
So how was that experience? Because it's not like you were a little kid. And actually, one of the podcasts I had was Aurea, and she moved here from Mexico when she was 13.
Mm-hmm.
And she was talking about how that experience, you know what's happening when you're a teenager.
Yes.
So you're 14 years old, you're pretty much your high school.
Mm-hmm.
How was that experience moving from like picking up everything you know and moving to the States?
I was not happy at the time. I think that was the only time where like I kind of like questioned my mom, and I became that teen that yelled and was like, why are we doing this? I didn't want to move because of my family, my dad, and my friends. But coming to Utah especially was hard. It was all like Caucasian at the time. Like you didn't see a lot of diversity. I remember I didn't know the language, So on top of that, I think as an immigrant, when you're young, and I know that a lot of dreamers can relate to this, a lot falls on you. Like your parents, you start learning the language, and your parents cannot rely on you for things. Like now you're an interpreter. Now you need to read instructions about this and that. Like, so you can't just be a teen kind of thing. Like now you have to take a lot more responsibility. And I was the oldest too. I am the oldest. And so I think that at first I wasn't happy and I was annoyed that we moved here, but now I am so grateful, and it didn't take long for me to be grateful about it. It was like honestly like right away, like after 3-4 months, I started like assimilating into the culture, and I enjoyed being here. But I did get bullied. I got bullied for being Argentinian, really, like that. The few Latinos at the time in the ESL class that I was in, they were like the cholas, like literally they were cholas, and they just for whatever reason didn't like Argentinians. They told me straight up, like, we don't like Argentinians. So, I had a really hard time understanding like even why. Like I didn't have any perspective on culture or like why they could potentially not like, me or whatever. So to me, I was just always sad at first for like a year or so until I started making friends and assimilating into the culture and learning the language.
So how did you learn the language?
I think one of the motivators was to get out of the ESL class. Honestly, I wanted to get out. Yeah, I was being bullied. I was being threatened. Obviously, the only few Latinos in Utah lived in the same little block, and so they're like, "We know where you live. We know where your family is." Like they would threaten me. So I was like, if I get out of this class, and I talked to the counselor, and he's like, "Well, you can't get out of this class. Most kids spend their entire high school years here because it takes time to learn the language." And I was like, "I'm gonna get out." And I am blessed with like a really high IQ. Like I was able to manage, getting out. I tested out of that, and I tested into honors English like right away.
You went from ESL to honors English.
Yes. I mean, grammatically, right? Like I still had an accent, but I knew I learned the grammar. I started reading books. I started listening to English, everything. And, I went to honors English, and I was like this nerd in school growing up anyway. So I loved the challenge, and I started making new friends. And, eventually I became really grateful. I graduated high school when I was 17. I went off to college in California. So like I did all this, I was very independent. And at that point I realized why my mom brought me here and like all the opportunity that we have here. So I became extremely grateful to this country, to the people here. And I, moving to California, I started meeting other cultures too, like other Latinos, like, and realized like we're all so different because we don't get that. We don't get to see that back down there in Argentina. It's like the most southern country in the world, so it's like we're kind of like separated from everything,
right?
So it was really good to experience the diversity and see the other angles and see like the different dynamics. And I actually now can speak like a Mexican, I can speak like a Puerto Rican, I can fake any accent because I get it, right? Like I get the culture, I get the food, it's a lot of fun.
So you move, within 3 years, you move here, you graduate early, you go from ESL to honors English, you graduate early. At what point did you know, like when you went to college, did you know what you wanted to do? Were you still...
To be honest, first of all, because this is a pivoting point for me, I realized my status. I didn't know what my status meant as an immigrant. I came here, I learned the language. I figured, oh my gosh, I got all these scholarships, like private scholarships, because I couldn't. The first hit was like, oh, you can't apply for financial aid. And my parents didn't have money, so that hit me. But then I was able to get scholarships, but then I couldn't. Even though I get accepted into certain schools, the moment they realized I was a dreamer, they would not let me in. I couldn't go there. So I actually got accepted into really good schools, but I couldn't go to all these different schools. So I ended up going to a private school that, they accepted me and they were okay with it. And I remember like it became something that I was afraid to like disclose because I became like stigmatized for it, you know? So I remember that was the first time where it's like, wow, like my intellect could take me to Harvard or like all these schools, but I can't because they do ask you like, okay, well, do you have a visa? Are you a U.S. citizen? Like, what's your status?
So when you guys came over, did you know, like, what brought you guys over into Utah?
Yeah.
Because, and then obviously you find out after you graduate or
Yeah.
when you're about to graduate that you didn't have papers.
Yeah.
So tell me about navigating
Yeah.
through that and how you guys actually got here and everything.
Yeah, so we came with a visa, and my mom had her brother there. So he painted a picture like, oh, I can fix your papers, like I can employ your, my stepdad, who, they're married. He's married to my mom. So like he painted the picture so easy, like, oh, you're gonna come, you're gonna have a job, immediately you're gonna get papers, like everything's gonna be easy. And it was nothing like that. Like we moved here, we went into his house, he had us for like a month, and then he kicked us out of the house because he went back with his wife. So what happened is he was feeling really lonely, so he wanted family here. But once he made up with his wife, like it's like, oh, I don't need you guys anymore. So then, like all of a sudden, my stepdad had to find work. My little sister was only 1 month old. It's Utah in the middle of the winter. We actually slept in the car for 2 nights before we found a way to find a place to live. My stepdad had money that was for like emergencies, and we had to use it. We had to use the money that we had brought for like an emergency, like picturing down the road. We had to use it all of a sudden, like right away. So now he's like, I have to find a job because we're not going to have money in a month. We're using our money. So it was like really a lot of crazy stuff, and I could get into it. And I think that's where my faith, that's when I also started believing in God, because that was my only hope at the time. As a teenager, I became suicidal. I started having suicidal thoughts, and I was getting bullied, and I didn't want to tell my parents because I already had so many problems, So that's when I started turning to faith and like just prayer. I would just say, okay, God, if you're there, whoever you are, like I need your help. And that gave me hope, and that like sustained me through like these teenage years. And then things got better, and I graduated and all that. And then college came, and that's when it hit again, like, dang, like why is like a stupid piece of paper like limiting like my options for colleges? Because I could literally go to Harvard if I wanted to, but I couldn't because of my status, and that to me was so unfair. So I think a lot of the times the stigma that people have against immigrants, like we're like these bad people that come and commit crimes, like I was like a model citizen, like I was doing everything right, I had a straight A's, and to me it was just so unfair. And I remember one time, for example, I was getting odd jobs to be able to pay for college. And I had a friend who's American that she got financial aid, and she got a boob job with that. And like I remember that was something that really hit me. And like
Must have been so frustrating.
Went home and cried because I was like, oh my gosh, like all I'm asking is an opportunity to go to college and like be able to focus and not have to have these 3 odd jobs. And here people are like not even appreciating it. So I think it looking back, I'm grateful for it because it gave me all the work ethic and the experience, and one thing led to another. I ended up like really getting, jobs that now I have the skills that I have because of those jobs. So I'm grateful that I started working early on, even as a teenager. But, it was hard, and we didn't have DACA at the time, which I think, as hard as it is now for kids that have DACA, it's still hard. But, back then we didn't even have that. We were dreamers, we were dreaming of something to come up to help us go to school. And I graduated without that ever being a reality. That became a reality later on after I had finished college. So I had to like work my way through college, and I had to like, some semesters only maybe take 3 classes because I couldn't pay for 6 or whatever it may be. So so it wasn't easy, but I'm really grateful for every single experience I had because it made me who I am now.
Right. So while you were in school, I mean, I had no idea. See, that's why I had no idea.
Yeah.
Like, and I know you,
Mhm.
and that's a lot of stuff to unpack at such a young age.
Mhm.
So to be able to have, I mean, obviously now you're able to look back and appreciate that and reflect on that.
Yes.
But how was it like? Do you remember how that felt like in the moment, in the
Yes.
time? Because obviously you can't get financial aid, and you're like, well, crap, I have to work my butt off to go to school. And working 3 jobs and going to school full time. I mean, that's it's full-time work, full-time school. I understand I did that,
Yeah.
but I was a lot older too. And I know how exhausting that can be, but working 3 different kind of jobs, having an undocumented status, how were you able to find jobs that you were able to pay to go to
It had
school?
to be all jobs. It had to be jobs that, I was a server. I once had a job that I didn't last very long. I purposely left. I think that was the first time that I ever quit a job. But it was like we were packaging like frozen fish. So basically, if you've never been, I had never been in a place like that. The entire floor is flooded with ice water, like really cold water, because the entire place has to be refrigerated, like cold. So you're like, picture yourself being inside a refrigerator, flooded water. Even if you have rain boots, like your feet are freezing. And here I am, like this, like really straightest student, like right with all this potential, packaging this fish with people that that don't speak English, or like other people that maybe I get why they had no other options. But I was always, I think, mad, and I've been able to forgive a lot of these things. But at that time, I was hurt. I didn't get it. I thought it was unfair. But I don't think anybody deserves that. But at the time, I was like, why me? Like, why do I have to go through this? And I remember there was one of the moments one person that I still remember. It was a college counselor. And I remember I went in there because at that time they were telling me that they had to, at that time they were telling me that you can't go to school this semester because you still owe. Like I owed like $200 to finish the payment before the semester started, and I didn't have it. And finally, I convinced one person to let me talk to another person, another person. I talked to the head of the department or whoever, someone in the admission, department or something, or financial. And, I went to him thinking he's going to understand. And when I walked in the office, it turns out he was an immigrant too, because he had an accent. He was Asian, and I felt relieved. I was like, oh, this guy's going to get me. He's an older male, but I was like, he gets it. He's an immigrant. I could tell. And I told him my situation. And at that time, I wouldn't tell people my situation, my status. And so for me, that was a big step. But I was like, hey, maybe if I'm honest with this person, like he'll help me. So I said, look, I cannot qualify for financial aid. Like I just need some time. I have 2 jobs. And he's like, why can't you qualify? I told him I'm an immigrant. I came here when I was young. Like I'm undocumented. And he literally was like, then leave the country. Then you should leave. And he was so cold about it. And there was like no comment after that. Like I remember I sat there like frozen, like kind of like waiting, like maybe they're like he's gonna like he's going somewhere with this, like, oh, leave and you can do better things, whatever. Maybe he's gonna turn into something nice, but it wasn't a nice comment. He was being rude. He was acting like he was better than me because he had a status or whatever, right? So I remember I walked out. I literally didn't say anything. I couldn't. I was frozen because I couldn't believe that came from this man. And I remember I left and I went to the parking lot, and I had this obnoxious red car at the time. And I remember I just got in there and I was crying so much. I was crying for like an hour in the parking lot, like just thinking how unfair that was, And I remember I thought, you know what? Like, I don't care what happens, because I think that's one of the moments that I knew who I was so much. Like I knew where I was gonna get, and I was like, one day I'm gonna be doing things way bigger than this guy's doing. I'm gonna be places that this guy can't even dream of being. And I just knew that big things were waiting for me, even though at that time the reality of that time didn't really like show me that. I just knew, I'm like, I'm gonna get far in life. I don't care if I finish college or not, or whatever my situation is. One way or another, I'm gonna figure it out and I'm gonna make it big. And I always knew that, and I had that certainty. And in moments when I would break down and cry, that would always come back to me. And I think that's going back to knowing who you are and owning like your greatness, which we all have.
But to be so young and to feel that and to know that, I think that's something that people, regardless of age, they don't even have to be young or 20s, 30s, 40s. I think a lot of people don't even realize or don't even have that opportunity. Yes, Coco is...
he's my baby and he loves the attention.
Yes, he's crying for Jessie's attention. But just to know, to come out of that and have that at such a young age, I think is really admirable, because I had a situation when I was in high school where a teacher called me a bimbo when I was a freshman in high school.
Yeah.
But again, and I don't think I realized at the moment, I was frustrated and everything, but my reaction was like, bitch, I'm gonna show you.
Right. That's pretty much what I was thinking.
Not as eloquently as you put it, but I was a freshman in high school, and I was like, I will show you.
Right.
So I how did you end up finding an internship? Because I know that internship kind of turned into something bigger. How did you navigate and find an internship while you were in school, and how did they work with your status?
Yeah, so that was really, really interesting because for that internship, I had like 3 other options for an internship, right? Like we had to do it through school. That school was okay. So I ended up going back to Utah because California became really hard, really expensive. So I went back to Utah, went back to school there. And in Utah, they had a program that like if you graduated high school there, which I did, then even if you didn't have a status, you could still go to college. You could do all those things, right? So that's why I went back. And this is like my last year, college. And technically what happened is I, had these different options. And I remember one was a bank, and it was the biggest bank in Utah, but it was a bank. And I was like, I don't want to do, it was for social media. And I was like, I don't want to do social media for a bank. That's freaking boring, what am I going to post, get a credit card. So then like I had another one for a boutique, which was like my top choice. And then I had one for a gym chain, Gold's Gym. And I was like, you know what? Like I really wanted to do the boutique one because I'm like, oh, it's girly and we get to wear dresses and whatever. And I just remember, like, I went to both interviews, and then they all offered me the opportunity. And the gym one was the one that, for whatever reason, they needed it. They needed social media help. And I don't know if you're familiar with that company, but it's like they were so old school, right? Everything was old school. And so I just saw the challenge and I liked it. And I ended up, I remember being for a few days just trying to think of which one I wanted. But I think listening to your intuition is so important. Like my intuition told me to go to that one, even though I really wanted like the dress one, right? Like that's going to be so cute, whatever. But it was a smaller company. The other one was just a local small boutique. So I saw the opportunity and I felt like, you know what, there's a bigger challenge here with the gym. And I ended up taking that opportunity. And what happened is it turned out that they didn't have a program. They didn't have a social media person. They didn't have communications. They didn't have anything like that.
So they're basically hiring an intern to be like, to
manage something that it didn't even exist, right? So they, in that opportunity, I've always been a go-getter. So I started seeing all the need for not just social media, but like before I came in, they would literally just delete comments. Like if someone said, oh, I'm not happy with the gym, whatever, they would just delete their comments.
Oh, no.
They would do so many bad things, right? The press would reach out and they would just ignore their emails and all those things that to me as a young person was like common sense. Like you don't do that, right?
So for those who are unaware of what you should and shouldn't do as a business and social media, the last thing you want to do is look like you're hiding something. And by deleting comments, by not getting back to media, it looks like you have something to hide. And people can make big time assumptions, negative assumptions based on just things that normal people wouldn't think.
Right.
If you're, if somebody puts a bad comment, you'll be like, delete it. But you can't do that as a business. No. You have to be able to address it. Even if it's something as simple as, we're so sorry you feel that way. Please reach out to us. We would love to help address your concerns. So go ahead, keep going.
I started seeing the opportunity, and there's like a million stories I could tell you, like what they could have improved at the time. But I remember I told my boss, who happened to be one of the executives, right, the CMO. And so like I had a chance to be working with someone that was higher up. And he was somewhat young. He was only maybe like 15 years older than me. So he was better than the other guys in the executive office that were older, So he kind of like was a little more open. So towards the end of my internship, he was really happy. And he asked me like, would you like to work here eventually? And I said, you know what? Yeah, I could see myself working here. And he said, okay, like in his mind, he was still thinking like social media. But what I did, and at this time I was reading this book by Seth Godin, which I totally recommend to anyone out there. It's called The Linchpin. And this book really pushed me to do more than just accept a job. At that time I had so many ideas and I was afraid to tell my boss because, I don't know, you're just young. And it's like, what if he doesn't care? But I remember reading that book and every chapter would speak to me like, you have to do something different. You have to stand out. You have to, speak up. And so anyway, so because of that book, I always give credit to that book. It just really encouraged me to go and like talk to my boss. And I said, look, I have a lot of ideas, he's like, you know what, put in a plan, put in a proposal, come back to me on Monday and show me it. Now, at this time, I was taking 21 credits because I really just wanted to be over with school, finish school.
Oh my gosh. That's basically like 2 full-time schedules.
Yeah.
21 credits.
Like I had to like request that to the dean and all that, get approved. But I wanted to just finish college. So I had 21 credits. I had a full-time job at the time too. And I had the internship. Okay. Wow. So even then I went home this weekend, and this is where hard work pays off. I went home and I put together a proposal for them. And this proposal had everything, like a plan that a professional would put together of everything that they could do, and the steps, the strategy, everything. Because I was in school for communication. So I did know how to put together a plan, strategic plan, all that. So I put it together. I go on Monday thinking I'm going to present it to my boss, my young boss. Well, it turns out he had planned a meeting with all the executives, and I never got that memo. And I didn't realize it was going to be a presentation either. I thought I was going to sit in his office across from his desk and just present. It turns out he's like, oh, okay, we'll be in the conference room, like, see you there. And I was like, oh my gosh. So I actually remember this moment distinctly too, because I used this technique after. This was the first time that I did it, and I didn't know it was a technique, but it works. But I remember right before I went in the conference room, because obviously I was scared as heck, I was like, who am I to talk to these old guys, right? But I remember it's like I put on like this invisible hat, really, like it's like you put on this persona, like, and it's not fake, because I did know what I was talking about. I did know my content. I did know what I was offering, but I wasn't confident in it. Like I was still scared. But it was the first moment I was like, you know what?
It was your version of Sasha Fierce.
Exactly. I'm gonna bring on this chick that it's not like me, but I know what I'm talking about, so I'm gonna be confident and I'm gonna tell them how it is, And I did. And I remember moments where I was standing there like present in the moment, like, dang, I'm here, I'm talking to them, and they're listening, and they're nodding their head, and they're smiling. Like I could see, like I could step outside and see and be like, this is good. Like I'm getting positive feedback, and that would just fired me up, and something took over me, and I just like owned it. I belonged there. In that moment I realized I belonged there, and I think they did too, but I was still scared. So then I leave the up. They're like, okay, we're gonna talk about it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like what's gonna happen? So
right?
Then I go like outside. They stay in there for like an hour, like it wasn't even quick. So I'm like waiting. Then my boss comes out finally, but he still doesn't talk to me. He goes in his office, goes about his day, and I'm like dying to know what happened. And so finally he calls me in his office, and he's like, hey, we talked it over, and we want to offer you a job. And I was like, okay, cool. Like I was expecting a job, but he's like, we actually don't have anybody taking care of our communications or PR or anything like that, so we want to offer you that position. And in my head I was like, okay, sure, like that's great. I'm like, okay, I have a position. Well, they wanted to make me director of the communications department that didn't exist. So they were technically creating, or I was creating now, in charge of creating communications department.
You went in as an intern. Yes. And like, how long was it from intern to director?
The 3 months or whatever the internship lasted. So now I'm in like the director of communications for Gold's Gym, right? So now I'm just like,
oh my gosh,
in that moment, it didn't even click. I remember he was just like, okay, pick which office you want. Like everything happened so fast. I was like, okay, I went that one. Like I picked like the biggest office. Like all of a sudden, like my office is like bigger than my boss's office, So I was like, everything happened so fast. I remember when he told me how much they were gonna pay me, because he told me how much. Like in my head, it was a lot. In my head, I was like, what? Like I didn't tell him that, but in my head, I was like, oh my gosh, I've never been paid that much money, so far in my life, right? And I remember like looking back, I'm like, I would never advise that to anyone. I would say always negotiate whatever they're offering you. Always ask for more. But at that time, it just seemed so good, right? Which that was one.
I think that's something with everybody for their first job. Yeah. Same with me. First job, you're gonna pay me how much?
Yeah.
Yes, because any other job you've ever had before is part-time or minimal, or like you said, you were doing odd jobs because you couldn't actually. So going to that, how did they at this point? Were you still undocumented, or had you filed, or
at this point I was fixing my papers. So at this point I had applied. I was in a process. I didn't know what was going to happen, but at least so by the time they hired me, at least I had a temporary work permit, which was good. So that really helped. But this is like years and years later.
Yeah.
So I really had to like pay the price And that's something that people don't understand. I hate it. And it's so ignorant when people say, oh, they just come here and they get, they get papers and they get all these benefits and they use the government help. I could never use the government help as an undocumented immigrant. And that is such a lie that people say that we use the help. Again, I couldn't even get scholarships. I couldn't even go to certain schools because of it. They check. So much less I would have been able to get like any social benefits or anything like that. That is such a lie, and it just bothers me when I hear that, because it's someone that had to pay like a really high price. I think it's so ignorant for people that have never been in that situation, that have never even maybe hung out with an immigrant, to like speak for us and like make up, because either you're making it up or you're really ignorant when you're saying these things.
I think also your mom didn't know, like as far as she knew, and as far as just her and your stepdad knew, you guys were coming here and things were, you were going to be able to get papers.
We got a visa. We came here with a visa. It was hard to even get the visa in the first place, So it's like we tried. And I think what happens also with a lot of people, that maybe it's not that they don't try. People have the misconception that like someone wants to come here illegally. Like, let me tell you, no one wants to come here illegally. Some people, they just don't have the means to come here legally. And
because it's very expensive.
Exactly. So when your kids are starving, it's not that you want to come here illegally. You just want to come here and feed your kids. And if that's the only way you can do it, because the current model that we have for immigration doesn't allow for someone that's in need to come here. It's usually you have to be super extremely talented, like recognized like a celebrity or something in another country, or you have to have a lot of money to come and invest $500,000, or you have to like have not even a family member, because that's another thing I heard recently. I'm not gonna say who, but I don't want to get
the way people are sponsored
say like,
changed.
oh, they bring all their cousins and their great grandkids, whatever. It's not true. You can only, if I'm a citizen, which now I am, thank God, like I can only bring here my dad, for example. I can't even bring my brother here. I can't grant that to him because he's already an adult. So
I
people
didn't even
don't
know you had a
understand that.
brother.
Yeah, my brother is in Argentina. I couldn't bring him as, even though I'm a
sponsor
citizen.
Him.
Yeah, I can't sponsor him. So and what happened with my brother, actually, it's kind of sweet. He actually, as soon as he turned 18 and he became aware and he saw my situation, because he's younger than me. So he saw me struggle with my first year of college and all that. He saw my situation and he became aware of what it meant that we didn't have a status or whatever. So he chose to leave because he's extremely smart. He's actually smarter than I am. And he read that, like, if you leave while you're still, like, not an adult, like you leave by choice as soon as you turn 18, then you're not going to get punished, for that. So he made the choice, which was super mature at the time, to say, you know what, I'm going to go back to my country. I don't want to stay here illegally. Before it was because he was a minor. But, once it became his choice, he's like, I'm going to leave. And it's sad because it was hard on my mom. It was hard on us. Like, we suffer so much. We still miss them. But that was his choice. He turned 18 and he's like, I don't want to stay here without papers, and he went to college over there and whatnot. But it was extremely hard for him too. It's not easy. Like the things that people are leaving their country for, it's not because, they're leaving for a reason, because they have a struggle over there. So he paid a high price and he just like chose that road, and I respect him for it. But it was really hard on my family, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, to go through that, and that's a lot to go through in a very short period of time. This is by the time you're between 14 and 21?
Yeah.
That's a lot of stuff to go through. Yeah. So by the time you get to Gold's, they offer you, you're already going through your paperwork. How long did you spend at Gold's Gym?
I was there for about, I would say 2 years or so. And what happened is the chain that I worked for got bought out by an investment firm. And it was cool because I got to experience that too, being part of the company. And I ended up working for the company. When it got bought out, it got rebranded. So I was part of the rebrand of the company, which is huge, which was another big lesson for me, building a brand from the ground up. And actually, because I knew the reputation challenges that they had in the past, I was really the person that championed, a program that cared about the brand, that cared about reputation, that cared about, let's not make the same mistakes as before. Let's actually, do things right, take care of our customers. So I actually created a program where we retrained, the salespeople. We answer the phone differently. Like everything changed. everything, the protocol for the way that we communicated with media. So I got to like really like own this project and change the corporate culture, which became one of my babies and my projects within the company, to work with the corporate culture. So now I was getting like all these different experiences, and this company had lots of locations and expanding into other markets in other states. So I started getting a lot of experience now and being exposed at a young age, and actually working with all the executives, which that in itself was challenging too, being the only woman, Latina, and being young. Sometimes
It's like
when
it could be three strikes or
right,
three, like depending on how you look at it, right? Some people would see that as, wow, we get all this in one person, and some people are like, this is too much for one person, too much in one person.
I think they loved the work that I was doing, but they also were skeptical at times. At times my age did come up, which shouldn't come up. But at times I would get comments like, oh, well, you're so young, or like, oh, it's because you're pretty, or, people that didn't know me. I would go in a meeting with like new people, and then they didn't know who I was, or like they would assume I was just a secretary, or, I'm like, I experienced a lot of those things that people assume, or like, why are you here? Like, did you flirt with your boss, or whatever it may be. And then got into sexual harassment and like all the things that you hear about in like corporate. And it's crazy because it happens even in those places. Like, you think that's an issue that happens at a bar, working at a bar or something, but even within corporate, you see all those things, and it goes back to ignorance, I think.
So I know you've talked about it in other things
Mm-hmm.
that you've experienced and witnessed sexual harassment.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get to a point where you, being so young,
Mm-hmm.
where you were like, where you either said something or you're having to go, or like, what was kind of the circumstances surrounding that before you left?
So for me, it was my health. I remember that even as hard as moving here was, I didn't experience anxiety as much as I did with when I went through sexual harassment. And it was hard for me because I was the only woman that people would come to. So I would go to visit one of the locations. I would always go and like visit the different field, locations, and women would come to me thinking that I could help them because they thought, oh, she's up there, like she's in the corporate office, like she has all this influence. And I did have a lot of influence, but when it came to this harassment, I didn't, because it came from the very, very top, from the CEO of the company. So I had already spoken up about it. Of course, I didn't share that with them, but they didn't know. They would come to me, and I started getting anxiety. I started getting nightmares. I didn't know it was anxiety at the time. My eyes started twitching like randomly. My hands would shake, like all these random physical symptoms that are from having a panic attack or anxiety attack, and I didn't know what it was. And I started getting worse and worse and worse. And it started affecting me. And even my boss a couple of times would be like, are you okay? Like I could be like in the middle of a sentence, and I would just like, so like I just became this other person. And when that started happening, I was like, that's enough. Like I cannot go through with this. I hadn't told my mom, I hadn't told anyone. I was afraid to tell somebody because I thought they would judge me. And this happened during the Me Too movement. So I would watch the news and I would see women being ridiculed for speaking up. And these were like women that were even higher up than me, and they had more influence, and they still got ridiculed for it. So I felt like if I told somebody, they would be like, oh, what did she do? What did she say? Was it her fault? Something. I was just as scared at the time. And I don't think I ever had been as frozen in my life as I was in that situation. I wasn't able to speak up for a long time, and I would just have nightmares. I would pray that the guy wasn't in the office, that he'd be out of town again or whatever. He found out that I told HR, and then he started picking on me, so that actually made it worse for me. He started mocking me. He would tell me like, oh, what are you gonna do, report it? Like, because he knew he wasn't gonna get in trouble. He made a rule, for example, I couldn't close my door, like random things like that. So like I started feeling really disempowered, and that was one of the reasons why I started becoming really passionate about female empowerment, because I realized that even though we were in the the 20th century or whatever, 21st century, but I mean like in the 2018, 2019, all those years, yeah. Like no, maybe not, because I was in San Diego. But you know what I mean? Like we were like in a decade where you think we're all empowered, and you think, and the Me Too movement is happening, and here I am like, hello, like we have so many issues here that are not being addressed. And I remember one of my fears is like, well, I'm not gonna get another job like this one because I had to work hard and climb my way up on this one. So obviously that's not gonna happen everywhere I go, right? Like suddenly you're not gonna get promoted like that. And so I had a
You're
lot
not
of
going to
fear.
go from intern
Right,
to director.
Like it takes,
Anywhere
it takes
else.
a special opportunity, you
Yeah.
know. So I had a lot of excuses, and I call them excuses because that's what they are. Because ultimately, you're gonna be who you're gonna be, you know, and as long as you stay true to yourself, you're gonna do well. And so at that time, I decided my health was more important. And I remember I told myself one time, and I think that was the shift. I told myself, even if I have to go work at McDonald's, which I don't even eat McDonald's, I will quit this job. And when I made that decision, everything else started lining up, and an opportunity in San Diego, which was my dream city to live in, popped up, you know, and I just took it. I put in my 2 weeks notice. I went to Aruba because I had already planned a trip to Aruba. So one of my last 2 weeks was going to Aruba. I booked an apartment from there. Yeah. And like I left, and I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know anybody here, but I just knew that my health came first, that I was not going to become this crazy person or stale person because, you know, somebody else didn't deserve to control my life.
Right.
So I think that was like the breaking point for me. And I remember I told my mom, I was so scared to tell her, and I finally told her, and she was so gracious. Like she started crying, and she's like, you know, like leave, like you don't need to be there. Like even if you have to just come and be with us, and like whatever happens, like we're gonna support you, you know. So I had a lot of support once I spoke up, and I think sometimes we are scared that we're either gonna disappoint someone, that they're gonna blame us. But I think it's so important for us to speak up and to choose us, to choose yourself, choose to, you know, choose your health, choose your well-being over whatever people are going to say or think, or even if they did judge me. I got judged so much being there before I left, even from the women in the company. They would look at me like I betrayed the company, like, oh, we gave you all this and you betrayed us. I actually, till this day, sometimes, like, you know, if I think about it, I get annoyed because I'm like, that man never served justice. Like, he never paid for what he did. But, and I remember they literally hired every single law firm in the state of Utah. So how can someone like me fight, even if I wanted to somehow fight it? You know, technically they had hired every law firm. They couldn't work with me. They couldn't even talk to me. So this is like, you know, we're talking about like a ridiculous case, which happens all the time. We see it in the news. We see it everywhere. It's like, well, they had to sign a confidentiality agreement, or they had this, or they had these lawyers. They protect themselves. They know exactly what they're doing, and they protect themselves.
Well, I mean, it could be said that HR is, you know, human resources, HR is not really there to protect the employees. It's there to protect the company.
Even though it's quote unquote there to protect the employee, it really isn't. You know, they're going to protect the company, and the woman that was there lied. The woman that was there literally said that I never reported it, that, you know, that it was a conversation, or all these lies. And it's okay, because ultimately, like I said before, every single thing that I went through in life has led me to who I am. And I don't think I would have ever become this passionate about being an activist or speaking up on empowerment or for women's rights if I hadn't gone through that experience.
So now you are the head of kind of multiple entities. You have FEM Latinas, the FEM Podcast,
FEMX
Podcast, the FEMX Podcast, FEMgency, and FEMX Quarters. Yeah. So you moved to California. Like, okay, you get this opportunity to come to San Diego, which I don't blame you.
Yeah.
It's where I grew up, and I had to come back as soon as possible. How did that start? You and your mom basically started FEM Latinas together, right?
Yeah.
So I know you were saying, you were talking about all of this stuff in regards to sexual harassment just made you realize that women needed to be empowered, that we needed to step into the strength that we have. So how did that actually start?
Yeah, so my mom grew up in an abusive home. So she grew up with abuse. I witnessed it. She got abused even as a grown up person. Like a grown up person. Her brothers still abused her because they did it all her life. Her father, then my stepdad. You know, when we moved to the US, he became really violent. I think he went through his own anxiety and depression and whatnot, and like his outlet was to like hit my mom. So that was another thing that I experienced as an immigrant, like being scared to call the police because I thought I would get in trouble. So we actually witnessed a lot of violence. He doesn't do that anymore, but she had gone through all that her entire life. I went through sexual harassment. We were really, really passionate about, dang, like women, we first of all need to be more informed, because she realized like, oh, there were laws to protect me. Like we could have even gotten like a visa for being abused, so like there are so many opportunities that sometimes you don't know because you're ignorant. You just don't know, what you don't know. And so information is valuable, also connections, like knowing the right people that can advise you what to do. And so we one time after I moved here, I remember I started trying to find a place here to connect with someone because I didn't have any friends. And I went to networking events and it was just like, oh, here's my card, let me try to sell you this or that, like there were no genuine connections at the time that I found, like any groups or anything like that. I remember I went back to Utah to visit my mom on her birthday, and we were talking about everything that happened. We were talking about the lack of connection and the lack of information and all these things. And I remember my mom was like, look, we've talked about this so many times. Like, why don't we do something? Why don't we create something? And I was like, yeah, let's do it. And we started coming up with ideas. Like, let's do events. Let's create resources. Instead of complaining about the issues that we have nowadays, let's create solutions for those, right? If we don't know how to ask for a raise, let's have an event about that. If we don't know how to start a business, let's have an event about that. Like, let's create opportunity for women to learn and become connected with each other and get resources. And so what happened is, as we were still talking, I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna do it. And I remember I literally closed my eyes. Mama had gone to the kitchen to make us more tea. And I closed my eyes and the name just came to me. I swear, like an image like FEM Latinas, like that just came to me. And I was like, what's FEM stand for? And it just came to me. It was like Female Empowerment Movement. And so in that moment, I was like, okay, well, if this is available, it's going to be creepy, So I remember I Googled it. It was available. The domain, the social media handles, which is really rare to find both.
Right.
So I just knew it was meant to be. So by the time my mom got back, I'm like, Mom, I already have the domain. I already have the social media. Like, she was like, what?
She's like, I just went to go get tea. What the heck happened?
Right. And so that, that was like the moment, the pivotal moment. And then I came back here and we did our first meeting, and one thing led to another. And it's funny because my mom's calling me right now, but she never calls me at night. So that's really weird that we're talking about her. But yeah, like we just went for it, and I did it, and we started attracting a lot of female entrepreneurs, even though we created this for every woman. But then I started seeing the needs of the female entrepreneur, and I was an entrepreneur myself at the time as a consultant. So I was at a co-working space, and I was like, okay, I don't find the connections here that I want,
But you saw something very specific at the co-working space you were working out of. What was tell us what you saw, like when you were at those co-working spaces.
Well, I mean, I it's just like different, right? Like it's corporate, right? It's I didn't feel the sense of community. I felt like it was a lot of guys, and like guys that are doing other things that I couldn't relate to, like they're engineers, they work for a company in Germany or whatever, and they're just like remote workers, or I just couldn't find that connection, and so I started feeling like, okay, we really need this community that we had created as FEM Latinas, like, and we were doing all these events, and it was amazing. I didn't find that in the co-working spaces. I didn't find that community. I didn't find that sense of belonging. And so I started feeling like I want to create a space like that, and I want to create a space where all these friends that I have and myself, we could host our events, and we have the space, because it was really hard to find space. Like, you couldn't really do the events at those co-working spaces either. So every time we had an event, we had to look for a venue, and it was hard and it was pricey. And so I think I wanted a combination of both. Something that, because all my friends, really, including yourself, like, we're hosting events. We're not just entrepreneurs that sit in front of a laptop. We actually need a space, and we actually need community and connection and real friends. And so that's what I wanted to create. And little by little, that dream started growing, and I started seeing the need, and that's how FEMX Quarters came about. And I also had the podcast, and so I'm like, the podcast at the time was only in Spanish, and that was amazing because a lot of people, even older women, started listening to it. Like, their daughters that followed me would show their moms, and then they started liking it. So it was really cool. But then I started getting women saying, okay, but why don't you do it in English? Like, we were in English. Or like even Latinas that are amazing, but they don't feel comfortable speaking Spanish, for like
me?
Yeah. So
I mean, my Spanish is okay, but I don't feel comfortable doing a full interview in Spanish.
I get that, and so that's why, like, I was like, okay, it's going to be bilingual, so after a year we made it bilingual, And it's just been a transition, but I think like every single little thing I went through in life taught me something, even the frozen fish, And so I think like one of the things I always tell people is like we have to learn to embrace and be grateful for the things that happen to us, because they don't happen to us, they happen for us, and the people that
That's
hurt
true.
us, even, they're teachers, right? Like this man literally drove me to my purpose. It's like if I was at the time
Love
I was
that.
resentful of him, and I had to get over it. I actually,
You can't hold on to stuff like that.
No.
Because ultimately, like, people talk about forgiveness, right? And forgiveness is never really about the other person. It's about yourself,
Yes,
being able
yes.
to be at peace with it and
Yeah.
let it go. Because if you don't, it's just going to stay inside you and eat you alive.
And you're giving them more power.
Right.
It's like, imagine this guy that I'm never going to see again, if he still had a hold on me and my emotions. Like, he doesn't deserve that. Ultimately, whoever hurt you, they don't deserve your attention, your emotions, your crying. And I remember I got a letter. It took like years. So like this is literally like last year, like years after the whole case and everything happened in Utah. I got a letter with the resolution, right? And of course the company wasn't found guilty. Of course the company came out winning or whatever. And I remember, even though I had been over it, when I read the letter, I cried. Jess, I did. I cried, and I didn't really share this because it didn't last long, but I did cry because I was like, you know what, this is like unfair. Like, God, this is true. Because I think one of the things that sucks the most about when like someone has victimized you or hurt you is like when it looks like they didn't, and especially a company, someone that has money or whatever it is, and now you're like, this person that no one believes you or whatever it is. But in my head, I was like, I had to let go. And I remember I was about to go to the gym, and I always listen to a random motivational video. And the random motivational video for that morning wasn't so random. The guy was talking about something really unfair that happened to him and how he had to let it go. And it totally spoke to me. So here I am at the gym working out, and like my tears are rolling down my cheeks, and I'm like, that's right, I'm letting go. And I'm like pumping iron, and I'm like crying, and I'm like smiling, like, and it was crazy. And then I went to the sauna, and like I literally sat there, and I was like, I'm letting go of this. I forgive this man. Like, I really, like 100%. And I know that I'm better off. I'm better off for it. Like, this served me. I would have not known. I always knew growing up that I was going to do something big. I always knew I was going to help people somehow. I always knew that I wanted a business or some way to help people. I didn't know how that was going to show up in my life for me. And this guy and everything that happened led me to become passionate about things that are part of my purpose. So I was like, you know what if it hadn't happened? Like, because that's what I had to think about. Okay, let's pretend that this never happened. I would still be working for somebody else's dream in a different company. I would still be doing a mediocre life. Yeah, sure, I make good money, whatever. But it's like I didn't feel like fulfilled by purpose, which is the best feeling in the world. And so I actually had to thank this man and the opportunity and everything that happened. And so I think this, like I said, happened recently, really like the end of 2019. And I didn't even tell people because I just got over it. I just took a YouTube video and like a little pump session to like get over it. But for the people that have been hurt, for the people that have been abused, for the people that have experienced even harder situations than I have, just remember that whatever it is that you went through, it's for you. It's going to serve you if you learn to be grateful, and if you just let go of it. Do not give those people any more control over your life. Don't let them, dictate how you're going to feel, how you're going to show up to this world. They don't deserve that. So I think that's so important for us to know and truly believe it.
I agree with you. And it hits me in a very certain way because I haven't talked about this on the podcast yet, but I am a survivor of sexual assault, and I did have to let that go. And there's certain things that are triggering, and I'll get into that in another time. But I had to forgive that person because I couldn't hold on to that. So I totally agree with you in that. Kind of pivoting back to FEMX Quarters. No, it's just a lot. I mean, there's so much to be able to unpack there. I mean, this could easily be a 2-3 hour podcast, but we won't let it be that long, I promise. You just opened in November of 2019. right before Thanksgiving.
Yes.
What is your dream for FEMX Quarters?
My dream is to take this place everywhere. My dream is that everybody will have access to it. My dream is to create a place that's really diverse and inclusive, where everybody feels welcome, everybody feels safe, and people can make real connections. That you can meet people that are like you, that look like you, that sound like you, whatever that is like, you know. And I want it to be everywhere. So we're actually opening up opportunities soon once we're ready for franchising. Because if someone in New York or someone in Mexico or someone anywhere, really today we got someone that maybe in Turkey wants to open a space like this, we want them to have the resources to do it, and obviously the support of our brand behind it. But that's like part of the dream, is to really take it everywhere, because now that this place exists, I see it every day. Just you have to. I even today I was like one on the verge of like crying like 3 different times, because for example, someone comes in and says, "Oh my gosh, I've been touring co-working spaces and like it felt heavy, and I come in here and it feels great. The energy feels great." And that's something you can't fake. That's something you can't create as a corporation. WeWork or other companies, they can't say, "Oh, let's create a strategic plan to create this feel that when people go in, they feel this energy." Like, you can't fake that. That's something that happens organically, and it happens because of the people that you have. The people create community. The people create the culture, and that's something I learned in corporate. Like, corporate culture is not created by someone coming up with a plan. It's the people that are part of it. And so I think I'm really protective of the energy and like the people that we surround ourselves with. The people, we're very intentional about the people that we bring in. And I think just everybody's so amazing. Everybody's so positive, so loving, so supportive, that really when they thank me, I'm like, I thank you, because you are part of that. You're creating that synergy and that, ambiance and the love and everything that happens in there. Like today I was just like crying because I heard it 3 times by 3 different people, 3 different times. And it was like, oh my gosh, like I love to hear that story, because that's why we exist. And I don't think I could have planned that even if I wanted to. I had the vision for it, but now to be able to see it happening before my eyes, like it's just, I cannot explain the feeling that I get. Like I just get really moved, and I just hope that it continues to grow, that we continue to expand, and that other people can experience this everywhere. Because, and that we have an accessible space, that people that want to host events or get a co-working space, like they don't have to break the bank, especially when you're starting out. So that's one of the goals that we had, to to be accessible, to work with all levels of entrepreneurship. Even if you're starting out, you can afford to be part of this space, and you can belong, and you don't have to feel like, oh, I have to, only if I make a certain amount of money I can be there. So we're very intentional about that too. And it's been incredible, to be honest. It's been great. And you're hosting your event tomorrow there, your launch. So I'm really excited about that.
But I'm excited too. I know we've talked about this, but what do you wish you would have known when you started out?
There were so many things, but I think one of the things is like the money aspect of it. I think as women, we tend to be really conservative. So when I was looking for money and putting together my budget, I was super conservative. Like, oh, I can do this, I can do that. Like, and I did. Everything was grassroots. Like, I decorated the space. I picked the furniture. I didn't have a designer. I didn't have an architect. Like, I had to like get really creative. But I think I underestimated the cost and the amount of money that I was gonna need. And I think that's something that's very common with women. And even if we have a big investor, it's like, okay, how much money do you need? Like, let me write you a check. Like, we don't know how much money to ask for. So whatever it is that you think you need, at least multiply it by 3, because you always need more money. And I'm not saying that in a way of like, oh, just be, like reckless with money. Like, no, like you really do. There are so many little challenges that I had in the beginning, because I only got so much money. And what happened is, once the money was gone, which was gone a lot faster than I thought, because I thought I could do everything myself, but then I couldn't, right? Of course. And so what happened is, like, then I had to get really creative, and it worked out, and I made it work, but it was hard. And so it's better if you are funded, if you're well funded, if you have the opportunity to ask for money and someone that wants to write you a check, make sure you ask for the right amount. Make sure you're realistic about how much money you need. And realistic doesn't mean conservative. Realistic means it takes a lot to run a business, especially with brick and mortar business. So
it's almost better to overestimate than underestimate.
Because if you overestimate, you can always, put that money back in the business. You can always give it back, whatever it may be. If it was a loan, whatever, you can just make extra payments if you have extra money, which rarely that will happen. But you can't, once you got that money, which is really hard to get money in the first place, it's really hard. You can't backtrack on that. Like, so thank God that the community has been supportive, and we've grown, and we have, every month it keeps getting better and better. So that's great, but I would recommend for people to always overestimate how much money you need, especially if you're a woman, because women, we tend to be really conservative, and we tend to think that we can do it all.
What are you curious about right now?
Curious. Can you expand on that question?
What are you like? I wonder. Like, what's that kind of next thing for you right now? It doesn't necessarily need to pertain to your business. Mm-hmm. It could be like, I wonder how the election is going to turn out. I wonder, but I mean, no, we won't talk about the election. I'm sorry. But I mean, just in general, like, what kind of piques your curiosity in regards to keeping you up and keeping you thinking to the future?
I've always been really curious. So that's why I'm like, wait, I'm curious about everything. But I think I'm curious about the future of what we're creating, because as much as like people want to call it a co-working space or an event space or whatever, I believe that we created something different. It has some of those elements, but we are a movement. And I'm really curious about what the next thing will be for us, like how we're gonna grow, how we're gonna expand, what's gonna happen, because I know that we don't fit in that box of, oh, we're just a co-working space. Like, I know that, we're more than that. We're a community, we're a family, we're a movement, we are passionate, we're diverse. And so I'm really curious about that. And I'm also curious more about travel. Like, there's a lot of places that I haven't been yet, and I'm a traveler at heart. I've always been a wanderer. I love exploring. And so there's like Asia. I haven't been to Asia yet. There's a lot of places that I want to go to. And this year specifically, now that my business is getting a little more stable, the co-working space, like I'm really curious about, like, okay, where do I want to go this year? What do I want to explore? Because I do want to get out more. I think that keeps me sane. That's why I went to Aruba probably when I was, I've been different places, because that does help me recharge, and it helps me be more creative, and it helps me connect with myself. So I don't know where I'm going this year. I'm also going on a tour, on a speaking tour, so that I'm curious about, like, I have some of the cities, but I'm curious about everything, because everything is evolving every day, and I get opportunities, and I meet new people, and it's just, that's a broad question for me.
Okay, so then tell me, what is something that you've failed at?
Ooh, that's hard to answer, because I don't believe in failure.
But it doesn't necessarily, it doesn't need to be failure where it could be a lesson that you've learned. Like, let me change the question then. Where's a time where you've fallen on your face, figuratively speaking, but you got back up, dusted yourself off, and it's made you better?
I think, honestly, when I started doing this whole thing, moving to San Diego, I think I could have done a lot of things better. I came from a corporate background where, like, I had the money, for example, to save, and I didn't, So then what happened is I was an entrepreneur in San Diego, which is really expensive. And there were many times where I was broke. And I remember thinking, like, why didn't I save? I had all this opportunity to do so. I had a stable paycheck for a long time, so I would think there were times where I started using my credit cards. I had to cash out on my 401k. I had to do these things because starting a business was hard when I first moved, and I was broke. And so I remember, I guess that was one of the times when I was like, dang, Jess, like, you could have done so much better, and you could be better with money. And, like, at the time, like, I was buying a house, or I was like buying shoes. Like, I just wasn't mindful. I never even checked my bank account, like, I didn't. And I remember I even got opportunities, like a financial advisor or someone would tell me that, I'd be like, whatever,
What a difference of when you're making like that steady paycheck and making good money, where you feel like you don't have to, versus like, oh crap, I have $5 left in my bank account.
Right, you have to care now. So I think that was one of the biggest things, is like the value of money. And to me, also, I always grew up thinking like, oh, I don't want to be greedy, right? So we think being a giving person, like not being greedy, is like you just like giving. Like, I was always like that, and I think I have become more mindful. And I know I'm a giving person, but I realized that I had the wrong idea of what being giving and generous was, right? So you can be generous and still be mindful of your resources. And it's not just money, it's your time, your energy, even like your mental energy, your mental space. Like, who are you giving that to? And I used to be a person that not just with money, but with my time, my mental space, my emotions, I was giving away too much to the wrong things. And I think that's something that I've slowly learned, and it's still like a process for me where like I have to realize, am I giving this person or this situation too much mental space? Am I giving this thing that's not worth it too much time? So I think that's one of the things that I'm still learning, and now I can manage it consciously if I'm aware of it, but it's still like I always had that tendency. So I think it's really important to be really mindful of your resources, and that includes everything, not just money.
That was the last of the hard questions.
Yes.
How you feel?
I love your questions. I feel like I shared a lot of things that I've never shared just because they've never come up before, and I've done a lot of interviews. So I'm really grateful that you were able to like get those things. Some things I almost forgot, like they were in the back of my mind, but I'm really glad that you have asked those deep questions. I love it.
Good, I'm glad. So let's come to the final questions.
Okay.
The easy questions,
Okay.
the fun questions. What is your favorite word?
Oh gosh, I know I have so many, but I think love, because I think love, and I don't want to be like idealistic, but I think love really does cover all bases of anything.
And you're in the midst of it. You're engaged, so you're in the midst
but it's
of
not
love.
just romantic love. It's love for your business, love for yourself.
So,
like love for yourself is powerful.
Yes. What is a dream that scares you?
A dream that scares me, I think it's surprisingly, it's like I'm really fierce when it comes to business. I see myself as speaking internationally. I'm not scared to get on stages. I think creating a family sometimes scares me. Yeah. And it's really crazy. But when I talk about marriage and like I just got engaged and we talk about the date and picking the date, and I think that sometimes scares me. And I realized that recently. Why am I delaying it? Because if it was up to my fiance, I would have been married like a year or two ago, But I think it's because I have seen so much brokenness in growing up and other families, and I think like I've always wanted to have this perfect family, like the one day when I have a family it has to be perfect and my kids can't suffer, and like I don't want any suffering. And I think that sometimes it scares me to know that you can't control certain things, and like what if I do bring kids and like something comes up or whatever. Like I think that's probably something that kind of scares me.
Yeah, I get that a lot. What is your go-to order at your favorite restaurant? What is your favorite restaurant? What's your favorite? Okay, let's just say in San Diego.
Sushi. It's definitely my favorite food.
What kind of sushi?
I always get for sure. Even before I look at anyone's menu, the one thing I always order as soon as I sit down, because I'm usually really hungry and I sit down, before I even order a drink, I'm always like salmon nigiri. Like I always know I want that, like no matter what. So I'm always sitting down. Okay, can I get a salmon nigiri? First thing, right?
You haven't even sat down there pulling out your chair. Can I get a salmon nigiri?
And it's funny because sometimes they're like, well, can I take your drink order first? And I'm like, no, I'm not ready for that because I haven't looked at your drink menu. But I know if you're a sushi restaurant, you have salmon nigiri. So that's the one thing I always order.
And then finally, of course, we have to end with this. Wine, red, white, or rosé?
Red, Malbec, which you hit the jackpot with your Malbec choice. I love it. It's a really good Malbec too. So that really matters. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Jessie. Salud. Thank you for coming on. Saludos, guys. Always, it was a pleasure speaking with Jessie. Like I stated in the intro, this interview was conducted prior to social distancing, so I wanted to make sure you were aware of a couple of things. Currently, the brick and mortar of FEMX Quarters is closed, but they are offering free co-working hours to anyone across the country to help with goal setting, productivity, and accountability on Mondays, and guest speakers to motivate and educate every Wednesday. Both of those sessions are from 9:30 a.m. to 10:30 a.m., so please make sure to go to FEMXQuarters.com and register. You can also follow Jessie on her various Instagram accounts at Jessie Medina Official, at FEMX Quarters, at FEMX Podcast, at FEM Latinas, and at FEMgency. Do you have a story that needs to be told or know someone who does? Then I want to hear that story. Please reach out to me via my social media channels, Instagram at The Wine and Chisme. If you go to the link in my bio, you can see the application to become a guest. And on Facebook, the Wine and Chisme Podcast, because I want to hear your story. Thank you so much for supporting the Wine and Chisme Podcast. Remember, if you want to hear more Wine and Chisme, please subscribe, rate, and review. Rating and reviews are always appreciated, and those rave reviews are appreciated even more. Until next time, mi gente, saludos.